Okay, so on to part 6 of Notes for Colette. In this series, we're not going to be talking about Avatar Colette, even though I have 3 painted up here. I actually do have painted up 3, not only because I love the model so much and wanted to try out a few different looks, but also because I do want to test the waters with Avatar Colette, which I don't believe to be terribly powerful, but I think will bring another element to my game, personally, with this crew. But that's not what we're here to talk about. We're here to talk about vulnerabilities with this crew. Now, the Colette crew is widely agreed upon as being one of the most powerful crews in all of Malifaux. But that said, this crew has a number of vulnerabilities that people cannot deny. People who play Colette understand those vulnerabilities, and that's what this video is about. So first off, let's talk about stat-wise vulnerabilities. We know that Colette's crew is a movement-based crew. We know that they're not really a high damage output type of crew, and they're not a high model count crew either. In addition, most of Colette models sport somewhat average stats in terms of defense, willpower, and are particularly low in wounds. The Colette crew is typically a low wound crew, and Colette herself doesn't sport a high number of wounds. She's only sporting 6. But that said, that's a little misleading. That's probably not the way to beat the crew, is to try and just, or beat Colette in particular, is to try to just out-damage her and put her down. That's actually one of the worst ways to try to kill Colette herself because of her slow to die, use soulstone, and the number of triggers that she can trigger when she does go down to 0 wounds. So actually, if we're going to talk about the vulnerabilities of this crew, we're going to talk about doing the kinds of things that aren't necessarily outright damage or outright killing. Some of the biggest, probably the biggest vulnerability for this crew would be paralysis, and paralysis for Colette in particular. Colette does sport a high amount of very powerful defensive triggers, and if you can get a paralyze on her at key moments in the game, she becomes much easier to put down. And the same goes for the other models in her crew, because they do sport some fairly nice defensive triggers, but not a high wound count again. Paralysis being a big thing. Slow is also very good, believe it or not, because this crew is a movement-based crew. They spend a lot of AP getting all of that movement off, unlike some of the other powerful crews that can just get their entire crew, dump their entire crew on you, and just still have all their AP to use. You can actually use some of Colette's movement against her, in that you're burning all of their precious AP, and often a poor Colette player will separate their own crew, or they may isolate Colette from the crew, and that's where things get very vulnerable, and you can start to take advantage of things like that. So paralysis, slow, very good. Anything that you can do to hinder movement. The other thing you can do is triggers like headshot or decapitate, triggers that take cards away, take soul stones away, and force auto kill without using the word kill. Those prevent slow to die actions because there is no chance for a healing flip. Those can kill Colette as well as taking away her precious resources. So those are some very good things that you can be doing to Colette, and they're not necessarily just putting out a lot of damage. That said, when you do need to take down models in her crew, you really do want to damage them or hit them with many models at once. So alpha striking, companion striking are great at taking down Colette models. So that's another thing to note. Now, as far as target priority, obviously Colette is the working functional brain of her crew. She's not the legs of the crew, but she's the one that triggers all these interactions, these powerful interactions to go off, and also manages the soulstone and the card function of the crew. So taking her out is high on the list. However, knowing what a durable master and how hard of a master she is to kill, that's not always realistic. So again, unless you're playing a bad player or a player that mismanages Colette, we're really not going to talk about that. And I know a lot of people that say, well, my crew isn't powerful because they can be beat or you can kill them through bad play. I just don't believe that that's a very valid argument, and it's probably not something that should come up when you start talking about vulnerabilities. So anyway, paralysis, slow, making them burn up AP, making them burn resources very quickly, and really just taking out models and giving what the Colette player gives you to take out can be very helpful. The other thing that you need to be aware of is strategies. Now, Colette crew, what makes them so powerful is the fact that they can complete strategies so quickly during the game. So denying a Colette crew strategy early can be very critical, because anytime you can slow them down or delay their ability to put points on the board very early, you're forcing them to fight. You're forcing them to make tough decisions. And if they have to go in and fight against their game plan, well, you're going to have the edge there. Typically, other crews will run higher model counts, so you can win the out activation strategy. You're also typically running higher wounds, and a lot of crews don't feature living models like Colette's crew does feature. About typically a third to a half of the models are living models, and therefore susceptible to just about everything. All morale duels, terror, harmless, all of that comes into play as well. Even though the crew isn't terribly vulnerable to that, but they do have to take the tests. So Pandora and other type of masters that rely on psychology tests are going to do fairly well. With regards to crippling a Colette crew, you're really looking at the big three models, Colette, Cassandra, and the Corfi duet. Those are really the heart and soul of the crew. They carry most of the workload, but don't forget that taking things out like doves, mannequins, are also very good, because they limit the kinds of options that are available to the crew. Now, one thing I should warn about is the fact that sometimes a Colette crew, a savvy Colette player, will allow you to kill certain models because it actually helps the strategy. For example, one thing that I will do if I have something like destroy the evidence as a strategy is I'll throw a performer out there. She'll take care of a piece of evidence, and then I'll run her up next to like a Corfi duet. And make her a nice juicy target for an opponent to take out. And the reason why I do that is because that will give one of the big three, like a Cassandra or Corfi duet, or even Colette, something like reactivate. And that becomes very powerful. So sometimes a savvy Colette player will even put targets in the way that will actually benefit them a little bit more than you to take out. Another thing to be aware of. So, really taking down a Colette crew has to do with understanding their vulnerabilities. Yes, a high movement-based crew, but anytime you're taking AP activations away, very dangerous. Anytime you're inflicting paralyze on them, also incredibly dangerous, because you're taking those precious reactivate and activations away from them, and also taking their defensive triggers away. Another thing that you can do to a Colette crew, in addition to paralyzing them, is you can also separate the models physically, use their speed against them. You can also force them to take morale tests, like I was saying before. And so really, they do have a fair number of vulnerabilities. It's just a matter of identifying where your main advantage is, and again, trying to figure out how to take all that movement away from them, how to make them play high-risk games where they can get across the board, but they're spending up so much AP and leaving themselves out in vulnerable positions. That's a big thing. And then finally, when it does come time to burning targets down, that you choose the right targets, and you choose, say, one target a turn, take that key target down, and you severely start to limit the options of the crew. When the crew does start going down, it really is a house of cards, because when you take, as you continue to take options away from the crew, they start losing power exponentially, and then it becomes very easy for that crew to fold. Like I said, it is a very fragile crew. There are significant risks that a Colette player has to take in order to get around faster than you, in order to get the spells that they want to go off. They've got to take a lot more risks than, say, some of the other more powerful crews, maybe some of the easier to use crews, have to do. Some other comments on vulnerabilities for Colette. If the Colette player is not managing their resources correctly, that's another thing that you can take advantage of. Now, that typically only applies to new Colette players that don't pay, that may not be paying as much attention to that as they can, but that is another thing that you can do to a Colette crew, is start using your headshot triggers, your decapitate triggers, to start pulling things away. You don't always have to, so the point of this video is I'm saying you don't always have to look at damage when you're taking down a Colette crew. Yes, they run a very low wound count, but really it's about taking their speed, their resources away, and their defensive triggers. So again, Paralyze, very strong ability. Slow, very strong ability. Even the Hang's ability to take their healing away, that's a very nasty thing to a Colette crew that runs low wounds but high soul stones, because they do require, they do rely a lot on healing to keep them on the field. So, I hope that this has been helpful. These are some things that Colette players need to be aware of as far as vulnerabilities, and enemies of Colette crews can take a few notes as far as taking them down. So, anyway, on to part 7, and I'll talk to you guys next time. Thanks.